get ready to pay more for crabs.
Yeah, and this is not because of inflation or tariffs, anything like that. It simply is an issue with the crab population.
Biologists just reintroduced 20,000 crabs to restore a coastline, and that single image is enough to stop anyone in their tracks. It sounds almost absurd at first, as if a battered shore could be repaired by something as small, sideways, and unassuming as a crab. People tend to imagine coastal restoration in terms of giant machinery, concrete barriers, dredging fleets, imported sand, and massive engineering budgets. Crabs do not usually enter the public imagination as frontline agents of recovery. Yet the more closely you look at a living shoreline, the more that idea begins to make sense. A coast is not only shaped by waves and wind, it is also shaped from within by the creatures that burrow into it, feed across it, disturb its sediments, prune its plants, recycle its nutrients, and quietly determine whether that strip of land behaves like a living system or a dying edge. Releasing 20,000 crabs into a damaged coastal zone is not just a dramatic conservation action. It is a declaration that restoration can begin with the return of ecological function, and that sometimes the fastest way to change a landscape is to bring back the small animals that once made it work. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. The event itself carries an immediate sense of scale and urgency. Nobody moves 20,000 crabs into a habitat unless something is badly out of balance. A coastline reaches that point only after layers of damage have accumulated over time. Erosion might have stripped away marsh edges, pollution might have altered water quality, development might have straightened natural shorelines, severed tidal flows, or replaced mudflats with hard surfaces. Overharvesting, habitat fragmentation, invasive species, and warming waters may all have played their part. By the time biologists intervene with a reintroduction on this scale, they are not simply adding animals to a place. They are trying to reverse a spiral. They are stepping into a system that has stopped regulating itself and attempting to restart processes that once happened freely every day with no one watching. The crabs become more than a species. They become tools of repair, carriers of ecological memory, and living proof that the coast was once able to support them in huge numbers before something pushed that balance apart. That is what makes this kind of restoration so compelling. It is not about decoration. It is not about making the shoreline look healthier from a distance. It is about function. Crabs matter because coastlines are built on relationships, and many of those relationships are hidden below the surface. Sediment stability, oxygen exchange, nutrient cycling, root growth, algal balance, prey populations, predator behavior, and water movement all interact in ways that are easy to overlook if you only judge a coast by whether it looks green or sandy. A shoreline can appear intact and still be ecologically hollow. It can have vegetation, but no resilience. It can have mudflats, but no productive turnover. It can have water, but no healthy food web. Reintroducing crabs is powerful because crabs sit inside the machinery of the coastline. They are not spectators in the system. They are among the workers. In many coastal habitats, crabs are ecosystem engineers. That term sounds technical, but the meaning is simple and profound. These are animals that physically modify the world around them in ways that affect many other species. A crab digs, scrapes, burrows, feeds, and moves sediment from one place to another. In doing so, it changes the texture and chemistry of the ground. Its burrows can alter drainage and allow oxygen to penetrate sediments that would otherwise become compacted and stagnant. That oxygen can change microbial activity, which changes decomposition, which changes nutrient availability, which changes plant growth. One animal shuffling through mud seems trivial. 20,000 doing it across a restoration zone is another matter entirely. At that point, the landscape begins to be worked over by thousands of tiny excavators, each one participating in a diffuse but relentless transformation. The burrowing behavior of crabs is especially important in coastal environments where waterlogged soils can easily become suffocating. Marshes, estuaries, mangrove margins, and tidal flats depend on delicate exchanges between land and water. Too much compaction and the sediments can become anoxic, meaning oxygen is scarce or absent. That affects roots, microbes, and chemical cycling. Burrows can act like ventilation shafts. They do not just create holes in the ground, they create pathways for air, water, dissolved nutrients, and organic matter. They increase the complexity of the sediment structure. They can help prevent surfaces from sealing over into biologically inactive crusts. In restoration terms, that matters because a coast that cannot breathe below the surface cannot remain vibrant above it for long. Plants weaken, decomposition changes, food resources shift, and the entire habitat starts to simplify. Crabs push against that simplification. There is also the issue of sediment movement. Coastlines are never still. They gain and lose material constantly. Tides wash in, storms cut away, currents redistribute, and organisms either stabilize or loosen what remains. Crabs influence that balance in surprising ways. By turning over mud and sand, they can affect how water drains, how sediments settle, and how organic matter becomes incorporated into the substrate. In some systems, this disturbance supports plant establishment by preventing surface hardening and increasing nutrient mixing. In others, crab activity can shape the microtopography of the shore, creating tiny ridges, pits, channels, and burrow fields that influence how water lingers or recedes. Those changes may seem microscopic compared to a crashing wave, but living coastlines are often determined by exactly that kind of fine-scale detail. Resilience is not only about major barriers, it is about countless subtle structures that allow a habitat to absorb pressure without collapsing. The vegetation side of the story is just as important. Coastal plants, especially marsh grasses and mangrove seedlings, do not grow in isolation. They are rooted in dynamic sediments full of grazers, decomposers, detritus feeders, and burrowing animals. Crabs can interact with plant communities in complex ways. Some species clip shoots, consume seeds, or graze on young growth, which can look destructive in a shallow reading. But ecological health is not the same thing as uninterrupted growth. Controlled grazing and sediment turnover can prevent dominance by a few species, open up space for regeneration, redistribute nutrients, and influence root patterns. The key question is not whether crabs interact strongly with plants. It is whether those interactions occur within a balanced system. In a damaged coastline, the absence of those interactions can be as harmful as their excess. Reintroducing crabs is often an attempt to restore a natural pressure that helps vegetation function the way it evolved to function rather than simply allowing it to sit in a static and vulnerable state. The food web implications are impossible to ignore. A coastline is an arena of feeding relationships. Birds depend on crustaceans. Fish depend on juvenile prey, sheltering among roots and sediments shaped by invertebrate activity. Larger crabs prey on smaller organisms. Small crabs consume detritus, algae, or plant matter depending on the species. Their eggs and larvae can become food for a wide array of marine life. When a crab population collapses, the damage ripples outward. Predators lose a food source. Prey species that crabs once kept in check may surge. Algal mats can expand. Decomposition pathways can change. The coast becomes less like a woven fabric and more like a fraying rope. Returning 20,000 crabs is, therefore, not just about the crabs themselves. It is about restoring missing links in an energy network that may have been broken for years. If the coastline had become simplified, one major goal of the reintroduction would be to make it complicated again in the best possible way. That complexity is often what separates a living coastline from a merely surviving one. A healthy shore can handle disturbance because it contains redundancy and interaction. Many species overlap in function. Many processes happen at once. If one stressor hits, the system bends rather than snaps. But once simplification sets in, the coast becomes brittle. It may still exist, but it becomes easier to tip into collapse. A marsh edge with weakened roots, poor sediment exchange, and reduced faunal activity can erode faster under a storm surge. A mudflat with low biodiversity can become more susceptible to pollution pulses or heat stress. A mangrove fringe without a thriving invertebrate community can lose nutrient turnover and seedling support. By bringing back a large number of crabs, biologists are trying to thicken the web again. They are increasing the number of interactions that can occur each day and each tide cycle. That makes restoration feel less like a one-time intervention and more like reactivating a conversation between species and habitat. There is something especially striking about using an animal most people underestimate. Crabs are often treated as side characters in coastal life, tucked somewhere between seabirds and saltgrass in the public imagination. They are familiar but not celebrated. They lack the dramatic reputation of sharks, sea turtles, dolphins, or whales. Yet that modesty is part of why this event matters. It reveals one of the deepest truths in ecology. Landscapes are not held together only by charismatic giants. They are held together by workers, by recyclers, by diggers, by species whose names the average visitor may never learn. Crabs occupy that category perfectly. Their value is practical, structural, and constant. They work tide after tide, season after season. They do not need applause to alter a habitat. They just need to be there in enough numbers, in the right place, carrying out the behaviors that evolution shaped them to perform. The number 20,000 adds drama, but it also suggests realism. Restoration biologists know that token gestures rarely solve ecological collapse. Releasing a handful of animals into a broken environment may create good headlines, but it does not usually restore process at the scale required. 20,000 is different. That figure implies an attempt to overcome losses not only in abundance, but in influence. For crabs to matter ecologically, there have to be enough of them to change the physical and biological texture of the habitat. The density matters, the distribution matters, their collective activity matters. A coastline is vast compared with a single crab, so restoration must think in populations, not individuals. That is what gives the event weight. It is a biological intervention calibrated to landscape function, not sentimentality. It also raises difficult questions about why such a reintroduction became necessary in the first place. Coastlines are among the most pressured environments on Earth because they sit at the collision point between land-based development and marine change. Humans love coasts. We build on them, extract from them, travel through them, and reshape them constantly. Ports expand, resorts spread, housing moves closer to the water. Rivers that once carried sediment become dammed and constrained. Wetlands are drained or fragmented. Runoff delivers nutrients, chemicals, and sediments in altered patterns. Fishing pressure shifts predator-prey relationships. Climate change raises sea levels, warms waters, intensifies storms, and modifies salinity regimes. In that context, the disappearance of a crab population is rarely a simple story. It is usually the symptom of many overlapping disturbances, all narrowing the ecological options available to the shoreline. Reintroduction is therefore both hopeful and accusatory. It celebrates recovery while exposing how much had to go wrong first. The coastal restoration aspect has another implication that reaches beyond biology into infrastructure and public policy. When a coastline loses its natural defenses, the costs do not remain inside the ecosystem. Erosion threatens roads, homes, farmland, ports, tourist economies, and freshwater systems. Marshes and mangroves buffer wave energy. Tidal flats slow water movement. Vegetated, biologically active shores can trap sediments and reduce the force of incoming water. If crab activity supports the persistence and functioning of those habitats, then their return has consequences for human communities too. That does not reduce them to tools for people, but it does underline why restoring them matters outside pure conservation circles. Shorelines are often cheaper, more adaptable, and more durable over time than hard-engineered defenses alone. A crab reintroduction therefore sits at the junction between ecological restoration and climate adaptation. It asks whether the future of coastal protection might depend not only on walls and barriers, but on rebuilding the life that once protected the shore for free. This is one reason the event feels so much larger than a species release. It challenges the old mindset that conservation is mostly about preserving isolated patches of nature for moral reasons, while real-world protection happens elsewhere through engineering and economics. In reality, those worlds are intertwined. A biologically functioning coast is infrastructure, not in a cold mechanical sense, but in a living, self-renewing sense. The plants hold soil, the sediments absorb, the food web distributes energy, the burrowers oxygenate and mix, the predators regulate. The whole shoreline becomes a dynamic shield. Reintroducing 20,000 crabs is thus a statement that the safest coast may be the most alive coast. That is a powerful shift in thinking, especially in a time when sea level rise and storm intensity are forcing governments and communities to reconsider how shorelines should be defended. There is also a scientific elegance to this kind of move. Restoration often fails when it focuses too narrowly on symptoms. If a marsh is eroding, people may add sediment. If vegetation is sparse, they may plant grasses. If water pools incorrectly, they may dig channels. All of those actions can help, but if the animal community that maintains those conditions is absent, the system can slide backward. The plants may struggle, the sediments may compact again, nutrient flow may remain distorted. Reintroducing a key invertebrate population suggests that biologists are thinking in systems rather than surfaces. They are trying to restore the engine, not just repaint the vehicle. That approach is harder, because it requires deep understanding of species interactions, habitat conditions, carrying capacity, timing, and long-term monitoring. But it also offers a more durable path because it aims to revive self-sustaining processes. The timing of such a reintroduction is also crucial in ecological terms. Coastal systems operate on rhythms, tidal cycles, lunar cycles, breeding seasons, larval dispersal windows, migrations, rainfall patterns, temperature regimes, and plant growth phases. Moving 20,000 crabs is not like stocking a pond with fish whenever convenient. The crabs need conditions they can survive and interact with immediately. The sediments must be suitable. Predation risk must be manageable. The water chemistry must fall within tolerable ranges. The habitat must contain enough structural and food resources for the released animals to establish themselves instead of scattering into failure. That means the event reflects planning on multiple levels. It is not just dramatic field work. It is the culmination of habitat assessment, species knowledge, transport logistics, and ecological forecasting. Beneath the visual spectacle lies the less visible triumph of scientific coordination. At the same time, there is a philosophical tension here that makes the event even more fascinating. Reintroduction is an act of intervention, and intervention in ecology is never neutral. Humans damaged the system, then humans stepped in again to try to repair it. The crabs become part of a story about whether restoration can ever truly recreate what was lost, or whether it can only establish a new version of health under changed conditions. Coastlines today are not the coastlines of a century ago. Sea levels, temperatures, pollution loads, predator communities, and surrounding land uses may all be different. So the release of 20,000 crabs carries a larger question. When we restore, what exactly are we restoring toward? A historical baseline, a functional approximation, a future-adapted ecosystem that differs from the past but still works? The event does not answer those questions outright, but it embodies them in a vivid way. It shows conservation operating not as nostalgia, but as practical negotiation with a changing world. Crabs themselves are perfect symbols for that negotiation, because they occupy the boundary zone between stability and flux. They live where land and water continually trade territory. They know the coast not as a fixed line on a map, but as a shifting mosaic of puddles, channels, roots, mud, salt, and current. They are creatures of edges. A degraded coastline is, in many ways, an edge that has stopped functioning properly. It no longer filters, buffers, cycles, and regenerates the way a healthy edge should. Bringing back crabs is like restoring the custodians of that transition zone. It acknowledges that the coast is not merely a place where the sea ends. It is a living interface that requires agents capable of working within constant change. Another striking implication is public perception. Big restoration stories often gain momentum when they can be seen and understood. A coral reef is beautiful, a forest is familiar, a crab-filled mudflat is a harder sell. Yet events like this can shift the emotional map of conservation by forcing attention onto species that are usually ignored. Once people learn that a coastline might depend on the humble labor of crabs, they begin to grasp ecology differently. They start to see that restoration is not simply about saving scenic beauty or iconic animals. It is about protecting relationships and functions that may look messy, muddy, and unglamorous from the outside, but are essential to the life of the system. That change in perception matters because long-term restoration requires public support, and public support becomes stronger when people understand why apparently ordinary creatures are anything but ordinary. The event also highlights the importance of scale in environmental thinking. Environmental decline often happens incrementally. A few fewer burrows one year, a little more erosion another year, slightly poorer vegetation cover, slight shifts in bird abundance. Gradual water quality changes. Each one may seem tolerable on its own until the system crosses a threshold and the losses accelerate. Restoration must therefore think at scales that match ecological reality. 20,000 crabs may sound huge from a human point of view, but from the standpoint of a coastline, it may simply be the minimum number required to restore density-dependent processes. That perspective is useful because it reminds us that ecosystems operate on their own arithmetic. What feels dramatic to us may be ecologically modest. What looks insignificant to us may be structurally decisive. There is no escaping the climate dimension either. Modern coastlines are on the front line of climate pressure. Rising seas squeeze marshes between encroaching water and harden. Human development. Storm surges cut deeper into weakened edges. Heat stress alters oxygen levels and species ranges. Salinity shifts affect plants and soil organisms. In that setting, restoring biological function becomes a form of climate preparation. Crabs, through their effects on sediment structure, plant dynamics, and food web resilience, may contribute to a coastline's ability to absorb and respond to these pressures. Their reintroduction is therefore not just about recovering what was lost yesterday. It is about increasing the odds that the shoreline can endure what is coming tomorrow. That is one of the most serious implications of the event. Conservation is no longer only retrospective. It is increasingly a forward defense. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us? What are your thoughts on what happened after crabs returned? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.